Welcome to After the Close, the podcast where we pull back the curtain on how deals actually get done in the lower middle market. I'm Dan Stetzer, and every episode I sit down with owners who've sold their businesses and the buyers who wrote the checks to break down exactly what happened between the LOI and the bank wire. We're talking deal structure, negotiation, the emotional roller coaster of letting go of something you've built, and all the hard lessons that only come after the ink is dry. If you're a business owner who is looking to understand how other business owners have sold their business, what lessons they've learned, and how they've positioned their most important asset, this is your show. Let's get into it. Hey, Patrick. Welcome to After the Close podcast. Today we are having a conversation with Patrick Dichter, owner of Appletree Business Services. And just to sort of get into it, I'm just curious from your end if you would tell the audience a little bit about what exactly Appletree Business Services does and your value proposition.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Daniel. It's going to be a fun conversation. Appletree is a full service accounting firm. So we do everything from monthly accounting, bookkeeping, business taxes, personal taxes. We also do mergers and acquisition services with people buying and selling businesses. And we recently added financial planning to kind of round out the full suite of services.
Awesome. Thanks for that context. And if I understand correctly from our pre-call, you acquired Appletree Business Services as a self-funded searcher. Is that right? Would you mind double-clicking on that a little bit?
Correct. Yeah. So I bought the business about 4.5 years ago, and I'm not an accountant by trade. So I got my MBA and I minored in finance. So I took a decent amount of accounting and finance. After school, I spent 7 years as a sales manager for a digital marketing company. And then I spent 3 years doing small business consulting and coaching. And when I was doing that consulting work, all my clients would always have terrible bookkeeping, and I was always referring it out, and it was a game changer. And then I heard about people that buy businesses, and I was like, wait a second, you could just buy an existing business. And then I met a guy who had bought a couple accounting firms, and that just set me down the path. And then somebody told me about Search Funder, the website, and I went and did a self-funded search looking solely for a bookkeeping and accounting firm, and ultimately closed at the end of 2021.
Okay. So because you were referring that work out in the past, you thought that why don't I just do this myself and acquire a potential business? Is that how you just sort of honed in on? Because as a self-funded searcher, I mean, some people get paralysis by analysis, right? Because there's so many different options. What about the bookkeeping industry was interesting from your perspective?
So I worked for 7 years at that digital marketing company, and I loved serving the small business client. And there were a lot of things that were attractive about the marketing agency that I thought were even more attractive about an accounting firm. So you have recurring revenue, there's no equipment or CapEx that you need to invest in. It's recession resistant. And I thought it lended to my skill set with business to business sales and marketing well. And I thought the clients and the staff were a little stickier in accounting versus marketing. So I was right about those things. There were some things that I was wrong about, before I bought the business, but those things turned out to be true that attracted me to the industry to try to buy a firm.
What were some of those things that you ended up I don't want to say being wrong about, because there's a lot of components to an acquisition like this, but what were some of those things that were surprises?
I thought you could buy multiple firms easily, and that is just not the case. Integration is so painful. And I think, we did a few acquisitions that catapulted us forward, but I haven't done any for a few years because it is just so painful to do, especially an accounting firm. If you're we do bookkeeping, taxes, and payroll. So there's like 4 or 5 different pieces of software just to run our firm. And if you try to combine another firm that uses different softwares, you're essentially like running 2 businesses for a couple of years until everything gets consolidated. So the integration is super painful. So it wasn't, I thought you'd be able to buy multiple companies really easily. I thought it would be much easier to cross-sell services. So my plan was to cross-sell consulting and fractional CFO. And it's very hard to do that once a client is like established and kind of settled in. It's much easier to add new services when they're like a new lead going through a sales process and they have a problem. And it was also surprising in just how different it is to lead accountants. They don't like change. They don't like growth. And so it's you just really have to slow down and get their buy-in and lead differently than, a bunch of other, like salespeople or marketing people. It's just, it's it's a different style of leadership and change management.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think a lot of folks might think that because they have leadership or management experience that it'll just transfer one to one. But that's an interesting point about persona being a main component of the folks that you're actually managing or leading. Something I've never really thought about that too much. So that's an interesting point. I'm
Yeah,
curious if we go.
just quick side note, one of my good friends that I worked at 2 companies with, she bought a fencing business, and the problems she deals with versus the problems I deal with are like night and day, of just like the persona and the staff and but it's something to consider when you're buying a business is like, culturally, am I ready for that? Do I understand, what makes them happy and makes them tick, and can I lean into that?
Yeah, makes sense. And then if we go back for a second to the actual acquisition itself, because from my understanding, what you did is, I mean, you effectively, whether you intended to or not, you took a private equity model where you just sort of bought a platform business, which is sound like is Appletree, and then you did a couple of different bolt-on or add-on acquisitions after that. So if we go back to acquiring Appletree, how did you land on Appletree specifically? Like once you narrowed down, you want to be in the bookkeeping industry because of the recurring revenue and some of the other things that you mentioned. How did you actually hone in on Appletree specifically?
Yeah, so I knew that I wanted to try to own 100% myself. And so given the little bit of savings that I had and an SBA loan, it probably meant I was going to try to buy a business for a value between like 500K and 3 million. That was probably the range that I had to be in to retain 100% ownership myself. So I went looking, and there's accounting firm brokers, and they wanted nothing to do with me because I'm not a CPA. As much as I tried to like build a relationship and show that I had an MBA, and I'd done a lot of work similar to fractional CFO services, and my plan was to backfill the owner's time. They just didn't care. They're just like, "You're not a CPA, no, like we're not going to deal with you." So I ended up having to do my own outreach, and I had a person build a list, and we did cold email, and 500 cold emails turned into like 20 intro calls, turned into 6 LOIs, and ultimately that first deal. So I, kind of had to drum up my own leads. And in doing that, there was everything from like small 1 or 2 man shops to I stumbled into some really big, like, multi-million-dollar firms. But ultimately, Appletree kind of ended up being a right fit. And at the time, it was 1.2 million of revenue and about 330,000 of SDE and a staff of 12. So that was kind of the journey and the size that we started with, which is on the really small end of what most, searchers and most, folks would try to go for these days.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, those are great numbers though. I mean, 1.2, you said 1.2 in revenue?
Yeah.
And then, okay. And
And
then
300
about
of
20, okay,
sellers.
25%. Okay, nice. Yeah, that's healthy. So then you on your side, I mean, did you go through a quality of earnings, I mean, or anything like that? And the reason I ask is because a lot of times with revenue of that number, right, like there can be some creative accounting. So I'm just curious, how did you verify that number? And was it through multiple conversations? Like, I'm just curious that process.
It was kind of interesting. I'll give you a long answer. Before that, I was under LOI and thought I was going to buy a different firm, and that deal fell apart at the last minute. But I had somebody from a big QV shop help me with it, and they treated it like a big QV and really frustrated the seller. There was this like really long info list and a lot of things that were requested that probably didn't make sense at that size, and it delayed that deal a little bit, and then that deal fell apart. So by the time Appletree came around, I was like, I want to do some diligence, but I don't want to frustrate the seller again or drag the deal out. So ultimately, I had somebody help me with a proof of cash, and then I did some of my own diligence, but I didn't do a full QV on the Appletree deal.
Sure. Quick break. If you're a business owner doing somewhere between 1 and 30 million in revenue, and you've ever wondered what it's actually worth, not a guess, not a rule of thumb, but a real number, I can help. We're offering a free opinion of value for lower middle market owners thinking about an exit, whether that's next year or 5 years out. No cost, no pressure, just a clear-eyed look at where you stand today. Head to the aftertheclosepodcast.com to request yours. Now back to the conversation. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's risk in any single deal, right? Like, it's just always curious how folks handle it. Yeah, especially at that revenue level. But yeah, it sounds like you made the right decision ultimately in the end. So
Yeah. And, if I were to do it again or talk to anyone else, I'd say that you should always do a proof of cash if you're, at minimum, like signing SBA loan. So,
sure. Okay, so then you acquire Appletree, and then your sort of investment thesis was that you could add on acquisitions from there just to sort of grow the revenue inorganically.
yeah.
I presume. What was the process after you acquired Appletree? Did you go out and hunt for your next target, or how did that work?
That first one went really well, and meaning like retain staff well, retain clients really well. And then I ended up doing three deals within about 12 months. And the
Nice.
second one came to me. So he was friends with the first owner. He said, I heard you bought Appletree. He had already sold a larger firm and then he had a small firm. And he said, would you want to buy my firm? And it was very similar client style, very similar like billing, very similar tech stack. And that one tucked in pretty well, pretty easily. And then the third deal, these guys had listed it online themselves without a broker. And I found it and, found it online and then worked out a deal to buy them. And then a fourth deal happened where there was a bigger firm that they essentially did a carve out. So they're like, hey, we've got these clients in the Northeast that don't really feel like a fit for us and the type of clients that we want. Would you want to buy that? And so I was so tired and like worn out by that point. I was like, I kind of like made what I thought was a lowball offer and they said yes. And I was like, okay, I guess I got to do the deal at that point. So anyways, that's kind of how the deals happen. And I tell that to other people, like the first one is so hard to do. And then after that, if you want to do other acquisitions, it's a fraction of the effort, So, and since then we've grown about 4X and of that growth, probably, 4.5 plus million we did last year, probably 25-30% of that was acquired. And then the rest was organic growth.
Oh, good for you. So I mean, that's where you're, again, going back to your initial investment thesis, whether formal and informal, it really did pay off because you were bringing a sales mind
Yeah.
to an industry that you felt like needed it with recurring revenue.
Yeah.
And it's maybe a positive at this point for you that the bookkeeping industry has a high barrier to enter because now you're inside of it. So before you were outside looking in, and now that you're on the inside of it, you're in a much better spot once you got in.
Yeah, and it's also just a growth mindset. And my hat is off to firm owners that grow from scratch. I think anyone that can grow an accounting firm from like 0 to 500K, it's a grind, but they're worn out, right? Or even to $1 million. That's where you see a lot of firms like stop because it's such a grind and it's really hard to, hire and grow a firm and train junior staff at the same time while keeping your foot on the gas. So it kind of played to my strengths where I can focus on sales, hiring, marketing, tech, and then let the team do that work. And so we were able to kind of like push through that phase where most people stall out. And, and now we have like a leadership team and systems in place to be able to keep growing. Yeah.
Nice. And if we go back to the initial sort of structure of the Appletree deal, were you doing things like running the debt service to understand where you needed it to be from a cash flow perspective, based on the SBA? Like how formal of a process did you run on your side from a self-fund or a self-search perspective?
Yeah. A couple of things played in my favor. Interest rates were lower then in 2021. So I had a decent debt service coverage ratio. The other thing I had banked on was that I could, for better or worse, I was like, I'm confident that I'm going to be able to grow revenue and do some billable consulting work myself to help cover my salary or some of the debt, So even if we would have stayed flat, we had a healthy debt service coverage ratio given, the size and the structure. But I also said, all right, I knew that I was going to try to, increase the top line and bring in some revenue myself. So, yeah.
Sweet. Well, I'm curious, given that you're in the industry and you guys do some QOV work yourself, what are some things that pop up during quality of earnings that surprise folks sometimes? Or that anything in particular that, or what's a good reason why somebody might need a quality of earnings?
Yeah, we probably did like 50 or 60 quality of earnings reports last year. And I'd say about 60% of those close. The ones that don't close and die, probably the most common reasons the past year or two, the business isn't performing as well as it was in prior years. So whether that was like, things spiked after COVID, or like they ran into headwinds with inflation and tariffs, or the owner got tired. That's probably the number one, is the business isn't doing as well as it used to. The second thing is the seller's discretionary earnings, or the EBITDA, is overstated. So the broker or the seller is trying to add back things that aren't fair add backs. So I'm guessing your audience knows what that means, but if they don't, it would mean like, hey, I used to pay my wife a salary, but she doesn't do anything. So, there's another 60K of cash flow. And then you dig in and you find out, well, the wife was like a key employee or an admin, so you're still going to have to replace them, right? Or they would try to add back marketing, when you're still going to need to do marketing. So SDE being overstated is number two. The third is probably working capital negotiations, or disagreeing about working capital. And then the fourth would just be deal fatigue. People wear out and they get tired and they walk, So those are just the recurring themes that we see with QVs.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, seller discretionary earnings, discretionary could be a broad term and it could be interpreted a couple different ways, right? So yeah, I've seen that as well, where folks sometimes will loosely interpret, or the broker or the M&A intermediary might loosely interpret discretionary and add back things that might not be considered discretionary to others, and are actually an integral part of the business. Even though they are discretionary, they still might need it to be essential to the business operating at the level that they do today. And if you take them out, then it's going to manipulate the total EBITDA. Then it's not quite discretionary, because it's essential to the business, right? So that's a really good point. Just sort of curious, what are some of your goals longer term with Appletree? Now that you've grown it so much, as you know from being in the business, as EBITDA grows, generally speaking, then you can get higher multiples. Sometimes you can be attractive to some more strategic potential acquirers. Just curious, like, did you have a grand plan coming in buying Appletree, or has that shifted since you've acquired a couple
It's,
other businesses?
yeah, it's shifted. My grand plan originally was to get to 5 million within 5 years. That was like grow the accounting firm to 5 million and then hold it, and then try to buy other types of businesses. And our clients would also like give us insights or deal flow. So if our landscaping client wanted to sell, we'd be the first to know. And maybe we buy the landscaping client, or a software business, or a marketing agency. So that was my original vision, is to grow it to 5 million and then try to buy in other industries. I don't think I want to do that anymore. Couple of reasons. I just see how hard it is to really like run one business well and grow it. And we have a lot of momentum. And if anything, I can invest in other people that are buying businesses in those other industries. And so the plan now for the next few years is to keep growing organically, and we've added services. So we added the quality of earning services a couple of years ago. We added financial planning and wealth management this year. So I think for the next, I can see myself running the firm up till 10 million in revenue. I don't know if I'm the guy after that. We'll see, maybe things could change and I still feel like it, but I don't plan on selling anytime soon. I've got young kids and I'm having a ton of fun, and I enjoy the space that we're in, and I love the clients that we work with. And it's really fun for me to be close to the M&A, and I'm kind of a deal junkie. So the deals that our clients are doing. So I'm just like, if I sold, then what? Like, I'd have to go push the boulder up the mountain again in some other industry.
Right.
So for now, the plan is to, keep growing organically and really like get the flywheel of financial planning cranking, and then we'll see.
Yeah. That's a good perspective. I'm sure it's so tempting sometimes as an owner operator some days, where you're just like, I would love to take the chips off the table and do the sail into the sunset type of thing. But I mean, until you're in your 60s or later in life, where you feel like you're really ready to downshift, I'm sure it can be pretty difficult to make that decision, because ultimately you don't have to. And I mean, I'm probably not far off from your age, and you feel like you fall in love with the game at some point too, right? Like they hit you up every single morning, and it's enjoyable. So I totally
Yeah.
get where you're coming from.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe I'd feel differently if we were plateauing, or I felt like I couldn't grow it anymore, or, if I was feeling burnt out. But for now, it's like, yeah, it's still really hard, but we've got a great team and great momentum. Like, I'd probably kick myself if I would have sold 2 years ago or something.
Definitely. I'm curious if we go back to the initial acquisition of Appletree, in those first 30, 60, 90 days, or really the first 6 months that you remember acquiring Appletree, what were some things that really surprised you from running a business after being an individual contributor or somebody who was in the corporate world as a W-2 for so long?
I think of myself as somebody who's got some grit, or like I was ready for the stress. But one thing is just you can never turn off. As much as you try to manage the stress or set up some boundaries, if I hate saying this, but like there'll be times where I'm trying to be present with my kids and I'm thinking about the thing over here, or like, I can't sleep because I think about all the things we need to do, or maybe the mistakes I made. So mentally, you just can't really ever turn off running the business. Another surprise was just how operationally intense it is. You take one client, for example. Let's say we do accounting for a guy that has like a landscaping business, 2 million employees, right? Or 2 million in revenue. So if we're doing his monthly accounting, his business taxes, his personal taxes, his payroll, there are a dozen different deadlines throughout the year or more. Especially with payroll, like payroll never sleeps. So just making sure the payroll goes smoothly, making sure 1099s happen, making sure his quarterly tax estimates get paid, making sure, when he's like, hey, I bought this truck, or should I buy this truck? I want to buy this building, setting up this retirement plan. It's so complex of just like making that one client feel like they have a smooth experience. That was pretty surprising to me. And then, as I had mentioned before, just how different it is leading accountants. I get a lot of calls from people that want to buy accounting firms, and I just tell them, like, just understand, you can't just AIify this yesterday and like go send half the work overseas, and you really have to like get buy-in and build relationships with your people, and they don't like change. And the story I always tell is about 6 months in, I improved the benefits with Appletree, and there were people that, not a lot, but there were a couple of people that just complained about it because there was like some new platform that you had to log into to take care of the benefits, and it was just like, come on, like that's coming out of my pocket. I'm trying to help make your life better, and like you're gonna complain about it, in front of a group. So it's just. Or we had this archaic email system, and we finally, after tax season, migrated to Outlook and Slack, and a couple of people just complain about it for months, right? And it's like, it's faster, this is better, you're going to be more efficient, but it's just that sort of thing of you can't just like you. It's really a people intensive business still at the end of the day, So you really have to work with people and have their buy-in to grow and to change it.
Sure. That's good advice. And the whole thing, going back to being present every single, or always thinking about your business in the back of your mind. Yeah, that's got to be a tough element to it all, because even though you might not be Elon Musk sleeping under your desk at the Tesla factory, you still have the element of just the mental cycles when you're taking a shower or something. I mean, they probably never stop. So yeah, that definitely resonates with me as well. I'm curious, as a self-funded searcher, it's hard to differentiate yourself sometimes to a potential seller, because not only are they getting hit up by brokers constantly or M&A intermediaries, but there's also a huge flood, a huge movement of the self-funded searcher community now that they're also receiving inbound from. So how did you, or what do you think you did well to separate yourself from all of that other noise that some of these operators or owners might be experiencing in the market?
It's gotten even more competitive since I was searching 5 years ago, and it's funny because I get those emails and inquiries now. I think a couple things that I would say to people is it's not crowded at the finish line, meaning there's a ton of noise and there's a ton of people that say, yeah, I want to buy a business. And if a broker in Boston has a plumbing business online or an HVAC business, like they'll get 200 inquiries within a couple of days. But out of those 200, there's probably 15 or 20 that are like serious. I think there's a lot of tire kickers. There's a lot of entrepreneurs. Understandably, it's a big risk to take on, and a lot of the people searching have really good career options. So I would say, like, be patient. It's not as crowded at the finish line as it feels. I think the other thing is you have to move really fast on good deals. There's a guy I follow online who's in real estate, Moses Kagan in LA, and he says you have to look at hundreds of bad deals And then when you see a good one, it's like seeing the matrix. It'll just jump out at you. So you know to pounce on it. And I think it's the same thing when you're searching. Like you have to get a lot of reps and most of the stuff is bad. And when a good one comes, you're like, that is different. And that is exactly what I felt with Appletree. It was like, oh, this is different, and you have to pounce. And I think the other thing as a self-funded searcher, you need to lean into that you're a person, your livelihood is on the line. You got to give your background and you're not some big faceless like fund or, corporation. My opinion is I think it's a mistake to try to look like big PE as a self-funded searcher. I think if you can get meetings and get calls, you can explain that. But, if you're just trying to look like big PE on the front end, like, they'll blow you out of the water with their cash that they have ready to deploy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, as a self-funded searcher, unless you just straight up overpay or are willing to overpay, then you're
Yeah.
right. You're just not going to be able to compete with private equity.
I just did this week. I still look at deals. I haven't done one in a few years, but I'm looking at wealth management and financial planning firms. It's one of the hottest industries, and a broker in that space told me he get 100 inquiries for every firm he lists for sale. So, I had to submit my profile through this intermediary and, it says like, okay, your company and how big are you and your tech stack, right? And we just started financial planning. So we have 4 clients, and I'm competing with just enormous groups. But I put on our profile, because we're smaller, we're more nimble and we can adapt to, your firm, and we're not going to force our ways on you and your clients. And we're not going to churn out your team and churn out your clients. So I lean into the fact that I'm like small and new, and I had a great call this week with a firm that's selling, and they alluded to that. They said, yeah, we like that, you wrote that you're not some huge firm and you're going to be a little bit more amenable in the process and, not so corporate.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that's a good piece of advice for even any buyer, right? If you're not going to have the capital that private equity does unless you're in private equity or you're strategic
Mm-hmm.
and when deploys substantial cash and can gain the efficiencies and the synergies that you would gain if you were to bring on somebody strategically yourself. So how do you separate yourself from that competition and leaning into what you might or somebody might consider a weakness of themselves is actually a major strength, because not everybody who's selling their business wants to sell to some faceless fund. So that's interesting. I think that's really good advice.
Now, I think the money probably has to be close at the end, but I'm at least going to like get in the room and be able to have a conversation. So we'll see.
Yeah. At the end of the day, like these people, most of these sellers have spent potentially decades or their entire career growing a business. They're not going to give it away to some kid, at least not most people. Most people are not that philanthropic. And if they are, it's probably not going to be you. So you're going to be in line. You're going to be in line with other people. Sweet. Well, Patrick, anything else you want to talk about from Appletree Services standpoint, or how people can find you or reach you?
This is a fun conversation. Yeah, always happy to chat with other people that are buying businesses or in the space. If you search Appletree Business Services, we should come up, or I'm fairly active on LinkedIn and Twitter, Patrick Dichter. So happy to chat with anyone there.
Great. Well, thanks for the conversation today. I think you provided some real wisdom and definitely gave some insights to some self-funded searchers out there. So appreciate it. And be good.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Thanks. That's a wrap on this episode of After the Close. If you're a business owner thinking about your exit, or you just want to understand how deals actually get done in the lower middle market, you're in the right place. New episodes drop every other week with real deal stories, lessons from the trenches, and the stuff nobody tells you until it's too late. Head to aftertheclosepodcast.com to catch every episode. And if this one hit home, share it with a business owner who needs to hear it. Quick note, everything you hear on this show is for informational purposes only and isn't financial, legal, or tax advice. Talk to your own advisors before making any decisions on a deal. I'm Dan Stetzer. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.